Can you talk about some examples for how to teach a dog to self-regulate? I have a couple techniques with my dog, and I'd love to hear more examples, particularly as they relate to fear, concern, and over-arousal. I would love to talk about self-regulation tools for dogs. I've been thinking about how I want to approach this and what I want to include in this video, and it's so hard because self-regulation is going to bleed over into other categories like co-regulation and attachment. It's going to bleed over into things like agency. It's going to involve things like setting up the environment appropriately so the dog can better self-regulate. And so I'm going to do my best to distill the idea of self-regulation and maybe some co-regulation into this video, but know that it's part, of course, of a larger scheme. One of the first places that I begin working on self-regulation with my clients is often in the ability to move away from things that bother them. This is particularly true for dogs who tend towards a fight response. And there are a number of reasons that dogs might fight instead of flight in a given situation. It can be very contextual. But especially if we're not already flighting, if we're fighting, or if we're fidgeting or fawning, I want to teach the dog that they can help make themselves feel better by taking space from the trigger. Sometimes that is through situations where they have the space, they have the ability to move themselves away. Sometimes it's through teaching the pet parents to recognize when the dog needs that support at a lower level of stress, and helping to facilitate that. In which case the dog is learning sort of like they have that agency by proxy. Their human will help get them out of that situation. And then generally, once they've taken that space, I want them to be able to engage in a behavior that's also going to serve them in coming back down in their stress levels. The act of running, if they are physically running, is going to sustain or elevate stress hormones. And we can assume that if they are taking space from something stressful, that there is already a bit of stress present. Of course, we're practicing these things without triggers present first, but if we're talking about that real life scenario, I want the sequence for them to learn to be to move away and calm. Especially if we are just getting started, the three most accessible ways to calm down are usually sniffing, licking, or chewing. And those are activities that I can support my dog in engaging in, and then they can ultimately engage in on their own. They don't need my help to, particularly to sniff or to lick. And so flight cues followed by a calming activity, both as management and as a training practice. A flight cue that teaches the dog how to move away and then helps them calm can also be played as an on-off switch game. And we have a whole video collection on on-off switch games, including examples of them being played. But on-off switch games are where you take an arousing activity like running, fetch, tug, flirt, pull, personal play, and instead of having, often with my clients, a dog who is already a bit too high on the stress scale, they struggle to come back down and they struggle to bounce back from the stress itself. And giving them a game that brings them up, sustains those stress levels, increases those stress levels, we turn it into an opportunity to practice coming up and coming back down. And so we do a bit of play, and then we do a bit of calming, and then a bit of play and a bit of calming. And again, it's important to me that calming piece isn't like asking them for behaviors. That's how a lot of people play on-off switch games. And when we do that, we're missing out on the opportunity to let the dog engage in a species typical behavior that will lower their stress hormones, not just sort of ask them to use a different part of their brain. I also really love these exercises to get started with because they allow my clients to practice in kind of a low risk situation, increasing and reducing their criteria as the dog is successful. So we want the arousal to be an appropriate challenge. We want to see that the dog can come down from that arousal successfully, easily. If they're struggling to do so, it means that we made the challenge too high. And so we're also building learned industriousness here, which is linked to resilience. And we're building skills for the humans, and that skill is going to be very important as we move forward. Take a breath is another really great activity. It's where you teach your dog to take a deep breath, which helps again on that physical level to bring the dog back down. It's something that they can learn to access on their own without having to be cued. And so we're moving into, again, that self-regulation. In the comments, we were talking about a video that Ash shared recently where she's combined take a breath with a deep pressure chin rest, which I love. Exercises that get the dog back into their body. On leash, Denise Fenzi's circle method can be really helpful. And again, I often see a lot of dogs, we use the circle method, which if you're not familiar is where we're helping them to move in a circle with their body, which a lot of dogs will do anyway to calm themselves down. That curvy motion can be really helpful. It can be helpful to kind of bring them back into their bodies. And with a lot of dogs, I see them start to do the thinking circles on their own, even if that's not already something that they had in their toolkit from before we started doing the circle method. I also really enjoy pattern games, and pattern games are going to be more co-regulation than self-regulation, but I really think they're worth mentioning here. Pattern games allow the dog to find some predictability amidst the chaos. And I especially like pattern games like the ping pong pattern game or Two Cookie, where there's like this back and forth movement. There's like this one paper on EMDR in dogs where basically the researcher says someone should study doing EMDR in dogs and kind of lays out a plan for how we could use protocols currently used for pre-verbal children with our pets. And last time I checked, which it has been a few months, no one had actually done any research there, and I am waiting for it. And I see that through especially those back and forth movement patterns. Those can be really effective for some dogs. And then you get the attachment piece there too. And so we're co-regulating, and that's really nice. I would love to hear from other pet parents and pet pros on how they work through self-regulation and build self-regulation skills with their pups, or co-regulation. I want to hear about all of it, honestly.